Okay, everyone. Hello and welcome to this online conference on the future, the possibilities and the dangers of online learning in the framework of our Project Ungoverned. My name is Marie and I'm your host for today. So I'd really like to warmly welcome all of our many participants all over the world. We'll have 5 presentations today and we're on a bit of a schedule. So I hope that everything works for you, and I am hereby officially launching this conference. I am very excited to have you all here. I don't see all of your faces, but I do feel your presence and I do see your name. So welcome again. We are really coming together from all over the world, which is also the point of this whole project, which takes place in the frame and under the auspices of International Alumni Center in Berlin, which has also been one of our sponsors. Well, I would say the two main motors of this project have been Nicole, Harkin and Ochs, who will be presenting the project a little bit more in depth in a couple of minutes. And we'll also be having 4 more very interesting presentations today, all dealing with the subject, of course, of online learning from different aspects, and speakers coming in from all over the world. So I'll be running you through the presentations, and the speakers will be coming in as we move along through this online event. So welcome again, and let's kick this off. So the first presentation, which we have envisaged for today, is a little bit an introduction into the Project Ungoverned, which is a project in the let's say in the period of a couple of months, and it entails 2 big phases. One is podcast series which have been published and have explored the subject of online education from these different aspects, from the point of view of students, participants, governance, all of the endless possibilities, looking into the possible developments and the dangers that it brings. And it has been competently and well organized by Kim and Nicole. So I'd like to present our 2, as I've mentioned, motors of this project, and great, I can say, probably friends already. So thanks for joining us, Nicole Harkin and Kim Ochs, and welcome to today's event. Hello.
Hi, good morning. Thanks so much for introducing us. I appreciate that.
Thank you for being here.
Okay, Kim, I'm going to go ahead and start our PowerPoint. Okay. Or share it, if you will. Okay. All right, great. So again, Marie did a great job introducing Kim and I. This is the symposium component of the Project Ungoverned project. We have a website, we have a podcast that we did, which has somewhere between 6 and 10 episodes, and we have the symposium. So this is kind of the beginning of the symposium. So,
hi everyone, I'm Kim Ochs. Welcome to the symposium today. So we'll just get off started by giving you a background of some of the original ideas that Nicole and I had when we were putting together this project. So first, why focus on online education? And there are sort of 2 practical reasons. First was to sort of start off, Nicole and I first met on one of the Bosch Fellowship programs years ago. And we had both sort of had experiences with online education. My background is in particularly focused on education. Did a doctorate in education and have taught in formal universities and online universities as well. And Nicole's background is in governance. And we sort of both came to the idea at the same time of sort of exploring this overall topic together. But online education, why now? And specifically, it's really become a pervasive theme in formal education, non-formal, and informal. So we see this in universities. We see this now in K through 12. We have 2 speakers today who are going to be So in terms of online education is becoming very pervasive in formal education in universities now. Years ago, it was there were real questions about legitimacy of online programs in universities, and now they're widely accepted. We've seen a number of online universities that operate 100% online. We've also seen more universities and formal universities develop online programs, and we've also seen what's called MOOCs, which are these massive open online source communities. One of our podcast episodes actually featured a conversation with Higher and Open Higher Education, which uses MOOCs to provide online education and higher education opportunities to refugees who are coming from the Middle East. So we see it in formal education. Today, we'll hear from two presenters about formal K through 12 or primary and secondary education in the United States, talk about their experiences with 100% online and blended learning programs. Non-formal education refers to things like professional development. So these are when we take online courses that we take through our jobs or through professional development programs or end in a certificate. Those are examples there. And in my own background, when I look upon it, I first got involved in online education in my role back in the late 90s when I had an assignment to build an online training program for new associates at a private equity firm that I worked for. So even going back, it's changed in how it's done in terms of what's available online, but it has become, as technology's evolved, as we'll hear a lot about today, what is possible and what has become possible. Things are very much online is embedded in all sorts of education. And in informal education, the final form of online, if we look at this sort of ecosystem, is going to YouTube for videos. These are casual ways that we all learn online and what happens. And another, just to go back a bit quickly, is when we talk about the growth of online, it's also a matter of global education. Online education is really, the markets are growing very quickly. And booming. And we see both in terms of their growing, they're maturing. We see something really interesting happening with the e-learning or online course space, which is we've reached a point at which the market is actually starting to decline because it's been so saturated now with online courses available. And we also want to acknowledge the importance that online education now has in digital education more broadly. So in terms of using tools, digitally enabled technologies in sustainable development. We're now working towards, as a globe, that we hear at Davos, we hear it through the United Nations as well, towards these sustainable development goals, with the goals set for 2030. Goal 4 of which is achieving accessible quality education and long-term lifelong learning. And here we also see online education playing a huge role. Right now we have 1 out of 7 adults in the world is without basic literacy. And we see the opportunities that technology has to really change that going forward. So that's one of the reasons that we decided to really focus online education. And as a growing industry, how we address governance issues in particular is really important. So I'll shift it over to Nicole to talk more about governance.
So previous to becoming a writer and a photographer, I worked in governance, both within and without the federal government. I worked for some nonprofits that worked on government oversight. I worked for government agencies. So that kind of is where I come to this is my background of good government work. And with Kim's background in education, we kind of made a nice team. So the interest in working on governance for me is understanding that historically, governance is not something that we talk about in America as much as I think the rest of the world. So what we learned through doing the podcast is that governance has no universal definition. Lots of people have lots of ideas about what governance is. And so I think it was good for us to start the podcast with our first episode, kind of explaining what governance was and defining it. The other interesting thing about governance as it relates to online education is that formal education has always been highly regulated. You had your school board, you have your county, you have your state, and then you have your federal regulations. Generally, throughout the world, I mean, that's a pretty standard model. And with online education, it has been outside of this rubric, outside of this normal system. And that means that it's kind of been the Wild West, to use like a well-trodden trope. But it's time now, as the industry has grown exponentially, to get the governance aspects of online education in place so that students aren't exploited, so that professors aren't exploited. And really, we just wanted to kind of start the conversation about this. Like, how do we expect online education to look? What do we want it to look like? What do we expect students to get from it? Because basically all education at this point has an online component. Even my kids who go to school, who are 5 and 7, have an online component to their education. So I think it's just was really important for us to start this conversation. So that led right into my nice little, what is Project Ungoverned? So again, we were trying to initiate a dialogue about governance and online education. So there were 4 parts to our project. The first part is the website, which we hope is a repository of information about online education and governance, generally, broadly. We had the podcast series that we originally thought was going to be 6 episodes, but then we had so much info, so much good stuff, we ended up expanding that to 10 episodes. And then here we have this online conference. And then we also had an event in Berlin that you can watch on video, where we spoke to an expert in online education about how online education was working with refugees in Germany. And that was a great event. As we show here, the program is supported by the Robert Bosch Stiftung, which is a foundation in Germany, the IAC Berlin, obviously in Berlin.
Just to talk about the team, one thing I'll add is that it's been very important for us to try and talk about online education and governance from a very global perspective, and that really reflects our team as well. So to give you a perspective, so Nicole and I came together back in the middle of last year with the idea. We approached and applied for funding and received it from the Bosch Alumni Network, for which we are extremely grateful to an amazing team of people in the IAC Berlin that have been extremely supportive of us, hosted us in Berlin for our event, and have been giving amazing support along the whole way of this project. We then, with the design of the first thing that we decided to focus on was the podcast. We then had met with Matthias Jochmann, who is a German living in Indonesia at the moment. He's currently doing the Bosch Lectureship Fellowship Program in Asia. He works there now as a lecturer and program manager, and he has been an amazing person in terms of doing all of the podcast editing and the video editing for the project. As things progressed, we then met with and are thankful enough to have Mojca-Marie Erjovec join us, who is our moderator today and has been our consultant and advisor on communications, PR, media, and social media as well. Marie worked for the EU as a translator and has her own communications consultancy, and we've been very privileged to have her join us and lead us in this way. And then the other 2 of our team members who are also based in Germany, I'm based in Hamburg, Rasmus Althaus, who is in Leipzig. That is the Leipzig crest that you see instead of his photo. He will be facilitating the Q&A today. So if you have any questions, you can click on the bottom of the screen for the chat box, ask any questions along the way. These will be handled and addressed at the end of the presentation. But Rasmus is a content writer living and working in Leipzig. And Jelena Piotrowicz is a freelance journalist, and she's also a fellow podcaster. She is a co-producer of a second podcast that's been backed by the Bosch Alumni Network and supported, called Step 1 Berlin. And we've been very privileged to have her help us with social media and strategy as well. And she right now is, should anyone be interested, she is tweeting live on the conference. The hashtag is Project Ungoverned 2019, should anyone want to join. But the international component of our group is something that has been something that we've all really valued, and also in terms of deciding themes that we talk about on the podcast as well, and trying to have that be as inclusive as possible to include as many different episodes. We've talked to people in Spain, India. We interviewed some people as well working in Bulgaria, the United States, internationally. So that's been a theme to make sure that we handle this from a very global perspective, which also represents the Bosch Foundation and the Bosch Alumni Networks trying to global reach in general.
So then we just wanted to give you an overview about the podcast, because well, we think it's great. So we, again, the first episode was episode 0, just explain the introduction. Episode 1 was the governance and online learning landscape. I already talked about that, where we kind of define what we mean by governance. Episode 2 is new ways of teaching and learning, an online professional development program in the United States, which is the most downloaded podcast of ours. We spoke to a woman who designs or helps implement online professional development programs. Episode 2, part 2, were new ways of teaching and learning, an online program for entrepreneurs, which is a mentorship program that helps small businesses incubate using an online platform. And then episode 3, part 1, is improving global access to education, where we interviewed Shana Kennedy-Salko from Chiron about refugees in Germany and helping them enter the education system in Germany after moving there. Or resettling is the better word. Episode 3, part 2 is improving access to education in India, where we interviewed Quest Alliance. And in fact, one of our presentations is by Shalani from Chiron, and we're very excited about that. Episode 4, part 1, we looked at online higher education, experiences in learning and teaching online, where we spoke to a woman who did her graduate work at an online university. Episode 3, part 2 was online education, administration, and governance.
In this episode, we talked to, we again sort of looked at governance very specifically, and with higher education being one of the biggest growth areas, we also looked at sort of issues that people were having in governance, talking about accreditation initiatives, about how to maintain quality in higher education, and interviewed a course developer who talked about her experiences with accreditation and also going through some quality assurance checks.
Okay, and then the last 2 episodes, we looked at data privacy in online schooling, which I think is an emerging field because all of this data is being collected. And so we wanted to know more about how that was going to work vis-a-vis governance and online education. And then the final was the future of online education enabling technologies. And we spoke with Alex from IBM, who will be giving a presentation here, our last presentation here. You can see on the right that the podcast is available anywhere you find a podcast. And if you're not into podcasts, listening, you can just go to our website and listen to it. There's a player there. You can just click on it and listen to it right through your computer.
This is Project Ungoverned, a podcast looking at the brave new world of online education. New ways of learning, new ways of teaching, and unprecedented access to education.
The boom in new education technology has sparked a gold rush, attracting new companies, global institutions, and investors. But who creates the rules of engagement? And who enforces them? Is online learning ungoverned? I'm Nicole Harkin, an award-winning writer and former good government analyst.
And I'm Dr. Kim Ochs, an education strategist specializing in ed tech and international education. Together, in this 6-episode series, we talk to learners, teachers, and pioneers engaged in a wide range of online education programs serving North America, Europe, Asia, and the Middle East with a focus on governance.
First, explore if people are actually concerned about the governance of online education.
We don't talk about governance. I mean, we talk about our own governance as a social enterprise and our need to have a board, etc., but not when it's related necessarily to the content or the learning experience.
So from a governance perspective, especially for online education, I think one big factor is how do you keep people motivated to continue to learn online, and the completion rates.
We don't make our own online courses. We get them from other providers, and sometimes changes in courses happen. And that, from a governance perspective, is hard.
I am for some regulation. I think that we need to agree on principles, and we need to have them agreed, or let's say first developed, agreed, and then implemented by consensus.
We look at the implications of online education for teaching and learning.
There are so many forces in our society now that make and help to cultivate in the mind of the student that they are a consumer.
The role of the teacher in terms of, guiding instruction, working with a student as an individual, becomes even more important, so that people don't get lost in the technology, or they don't get distracted by the technology as well.
We review challenges and emerging issues.
That I think a challenge also that might come up for us in the next years is that we really want to achieve systemic change and have entrepreneurship education being more accessible to our audience. And I think to do so, we cannot do it alone, and we will want and we will need to join forces with other organizations that have the same mission, an aligned mission.
There's an emerging movement in the world which says that personal data should be a human right, that all humans are entitled to own their personal data and to monetize that data if they so choose.
And we explore what might happen to online education in the future.
Because when we move into a world where everybody's credentials are available through the blockchain, where I can source education from multiple sources anywhere in the world, you start to question what's the role of, an individual institution in this kind of context. So how are they relevant in a world where me as an individual, if I know that I want to become a veterinarian, I can piece that educational experience together on my own without using any individual going to any institution.
Join us as we discuss the online learning landscape with educators, students, nonprofits, technology companies, and good governance groups.
You can subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you download your podcasts. For more information, go to www.projectungoverned.com.
I'm Nicole Harkin.
And I'm Kim Ochs. Stay tuned for Project Ungoverned.
Thanks very much for this very interesting presentation. Would you have anything else to add, Nicole, Kim?
So after putting together the podcast, we thought, and that was sort of the initiative to start a conversation about governance and online. But we wanted to make sure that we opened it up and saw that the symposium or the conference that we're having today is an important way to really bring together researchers and practitioners to talk about what they're learning, what they're seeing, and tease out some more of the issues and answer some of the questions that we posed in our podcast. So to just walk you through very briefly the quick overview of the agenda today, first we'll be hearing from Dr. Laura Maloney, who's adjunct faculty at American College of Education, which is based in the United States. And she'll be talking about blended learning communities inside Florida's brick and mortar high school classrooms. What's interesting too about this presentation is Laura is presenting her doctoral research, which she completed at an online university as well. So she comes bringing that experience and then also knowing a lot about online education at the K through 12 level and blended learning environments. We'll then be joined with Denise Manganiello, who's a principal at Seneca Valley Academy of Choice, and talking about blended learning and what different types of things that they produce. And her topic is sustainability and growth K through 12 online learning, and her focus again is on the United States. So these are our two researchers and their perspectives being both practitioners and researchers together. And then we're going to move on to hearing from two organizations that were featured in our podcast series. First, we'll hear from Shalini Menon, who is the Associate Director of Education and Educator Development at Quest Alliance. They're featured in podcast episode 3, part 2. She'll be talking about human relationships at the center of digital learning. And one thing that's interesting, if you listen to that podcast episode about what Quest Alliance is doing in India, is really tackling online education from a number of tackling it from the teaching perspective and also the parent's perspective, and acknowledging the parent's role in the education of the child, and how do we consider the role of what happens outside the school as well. And then finally, our concluding presentation today is from Alex Kaplan, who's a member of IBM, a member of the IBM Industry Academy and the Global Leader Strategic Deals at IBM. He works in a division called IBM Watson Education, and he'll be talking about or asking the question, can education keep up with advanced technologies? And again, this relates to some of the things he said in podcast episode 6, in which he really dove in to talk about artificial intelligence and also blockchain technologies, which are important to IBM.
Okay, well, and that's it. Enjoy the presentations, and thank you so much for joining us. Of course, just one more plug for the projectungoverned.com website.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Nicole, Harkin, and Kim Ochs, for presenting this well, let's say a brief picture of this very comprehensive and in-depth project in the end, because it did touch upon all of the interesting and the relevant aspects of online learning that we will also come across today. So now I thought that we could perhaps briefly discuss a question or two which have occurred during your presentations. Now I'll just check in on Rasmus whether he is able to give us a question or two. I do know that we have thought to be able to go into the second presentation already, and I hereby greet our second speaker, Laura. Hello, and ask for a little bit of your patience. We're running a couple of minutes late, so perhaps you wouldn't mind waiting 2 to 3 minutes for your presentation. Okay, great. Thanks very much for your understanding. And Rasmus, what have been the most pertinent questions that have occurred during the presentation of Nicole and Kim?
Yeah, thank you, Marie. Hi, everybody. So here's my first question for you. Did you come across anything unexpected in the course of the project?
Oh, that's interesting. I would say the interesting thing to me was the range of different options there are for online education now. And Kim kind of was able to categorize those into formal, informal, and what was it? Formal, non-formal?
Yep. Informal, and non-formal.
Okay. Just the idea that, you know, Washington, D.C., where I live, you can go to online preschool and online, you know, primary school was really surprising to me. Kim?
I'd add to same thing was there wasn't a common definition or understanding of what governance meant. And we were getting very different responses when we talked to people in Europe versus talked to people in the US. Governance to a lot of people in the United States meant government. So they would talk to us more about school districts, laws about data privacy, where governance as it related to other people we talked to, had more to do with civil society, the responsibility of individuals, and how we all together play a role in governance. So I think that for me was an important takeaway in terms of steps forward as well, who needs to be involved in the discussions and who could make good partners for addressing some of these issues as we focus on quality and legitimacy and access going forward.
Okay, so basically here we come across already well, as regards different contexts and understanding of concepts, which does bring in considerable difficulties in when we do want to define any sort of governance, which was the topic of some of the podcasts. Rasmus, did you have anything else you wanted to raise based on questions that have been coming in?
Yeah, here's another question if we have time. Can you talk about hurdles you came across in making the podcast?
Oh, sure. I mean, I would say that making the podcast was more work than we expected, and maybe more rewarding than we expected. The first big hurdle we came across was GDPR, which is the new data privacy laws that went into place in the EU. And that meant that we had to be very careful about how we protected other people's data, which actually is important. I mean, we should be all protecting people's data, but we had to figure out how to navigate that. And in fact, Kim wrote a lovely blog post outlining how to deal with GDPR if you need such help. What about you, Kim?
That summarizes it.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you very much. Maybe just to draw attention of everyone to this blog post, which has been drawing considerable attention from the outside, because apparently it's one of the most comprehensive overviews of the new GDPR regulation, and people have been using it as a sort of guidance for their actions. So thanks very much.